This is Grief and Grit, from heartache to high fives with a dash of sass. The podcast that turns the tables on traditional grief talks with a fresh, sassy spin. Listen in for candid conversations about the messy, awkward, and downright hilarious aspects of dealing with loss. Because sometimes the best way to cope is with a little laughter and a lot of grit.
Hi, Simonie.
Hi, Greer. How are you?
I'm good. How about you?
Good, good. Everybody survived the storm that came through Atlanta?
Yes. We actually had some water in our basement, but you know what? Perspective kept me calm. Everyone was healthy and safe, and we actually got really lucky. Nothing got ruined. But just seeing on the news the devastation, and
Terrible.
it's just so heartbreaking.
Oh, terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible and amazing what Mother Nature can do. The wrath
Mhm.
of Mother Nature is nothing to be taken lightly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jared and I used to love going to Asheville for our anniversary and just seeing the devastation in the River Arts District, and it just grief. It's
Exactly. Yep.
there are so many causes to it,
That's
but
it.
we
That's
just
it.
hope as many people are safe, and it's going to be a long recovery.
Yeah. So this month is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month, and we're continuing our series of featuring special guests who have endured these types of losses. And I just want to say this is a reminder to our listeners that this is a very sensitive topic. We know that. And it's difficult for those who have experienced these type of losses, and especially, being vulnerable enough to come on and share their stories with us. And also because right now it's such a polarizing topic, given the political climate today. But, we all know that we have our own beliefs. And we at Grief and Grit feel very strongly that no matter our story, grief is grief. And we're here to help people feel less alone. We're trying to eliminate the judgment and stigma surrounding these real life experiences. And what we're doing mostly is trying to normalize grief.
Exactly. And today we have a very, very special guest. Today we have Barbara Leahy, who is first and most importantly a dear friend of mine and Simonie's. She is the founder of Leadership Growth Partners here in Atlanta, which is a leadership development consulting firm. Simonie and I had the luxury of meeting Barbara through a leadership program we both took here in Atlanta. And Barbara is here to tell her story that happened 20 plus years ago. And this is just a very significant example of how grief never truly goes away. So thank you, Barbara, for being here. We're really grateful.
Oh, thank you both. And before I start, I just want to let you both know how appreciative I am for your authenticity and your vulnerability and just your willingness to help people grieve. And I love what you said just about normalizing it and like getting it out there, because I have a fundamental belief we're not supposed to do this alone. And so it's just really beautiful what you all have created. So thank you for having me.
Thank
you. It means a lot.
Yeah.
So would you like to dive in and share your story with us?
Sure.
Okay.
So it's been really interesting. So I think we met a month ago and started talking about this. And I have taken this month really as, I don't know, a pause almost to really consider and pay attention to my story. And so I drafted out. So I've blogged about my story and I've shared my story, but this is the first time I've shared the entirety in one sitting. And so that too, I'm grateful. So regardless of what happens today, it's just been another layer of me being able to pay attention to what matters. So I'm grateful for that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I realized after years of exploring that life is just really full of love, loss, letting go, and then showing up. And so through this exploration, I've also been realizing that there's this concept called liminal space, which I love. And it is the concept of really like the messy middle. And so I feel like the exploration of grief often just feels like the messy middle. Like we had what we had, and then we have a loss, and we're sitting in this liminal space, this messy bit, and we can almost see what could be, but we're not quite there yet. And so even though my story is, gosh, almost 21 years old, it still just continues to unfold. And so it's been really beautiful just exploring that.
Wow.
Yeah. So really interesting. 21 years ago, probably this month, my husband and I found out that we were pregnant, and we were super excited. We were pregnant with twins. Um, I was supposed to have a due date of May 17th and actually gave birth on February 20th. And so I was 27 weeks, 5 days. And we were a bit later in life when we got pregnant, and we were excited to be in this twins club of having twins. We also found out we were having girls. And so I have three sisters. So the thought of having twin girls was just so beautiful to me. So pregnancy was great. I loved being pregnant. And then I remember we went to a twins class and just learned a little bit about twins. And then the very end, the instructor mentioned some things that could happen if you go in preterm labor. And I remember looking at my husband, and we both were like, yeah, that's not going to happen. So I tuned that all out. Little did I know it would have been really good to pay attention, but tune that all out. And then kept going. And so went to the hospital. Pregnancy, I said, was great, enjoyed it. And then about 25 weeks, went to the hospital just for our regular ultrasound, and was doing the ultrasound. And then the ultrasound tech kind of made a little weird look at me. And she's like, hey, I'll be right back. And I was like, uh-oh, that's not good. So she left, came back, brought the doctor in and said, hey, do you know that you're having active contractions right now? And I was like, no, I have no idea. She's like, yeah, you are. She said, and you need to go to the hospital. So where I was having the ultrasound happened to be in the hospital. So next thing I know, we're whisked away, and it felt like a dungeon. It wasn't a dungeon. It was just some room, a windowless room, but I remember it being a dungeon. And we were down there, and doctor came in, and she's like, yeah, you're going to be on bed rest, and we need you not to give birth yet because you're really early. And I was like, okay. So in my head, I was thinking, okay, so I can get my computer, I'll work from home, my mom can come hang out. And I was like, okay, so I'm ready to go. She's like, yeah, you're not actually leaving. You're going to the women's unit, and you are staying here in the hospital until whenever you give birth. And so as someone who's incredibly active and just loves to go, 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 I could not fathom that I would be laying in bed for 3 months. So I didn't. So spoiler alert, it was not 3 months, but went up, started the bed rest, and just my new goal was to keep these girls in. So I said, okay, every day counts. And then I woke up one morning and I felt kind of weird and went to the restroom, and then my water had broken. So it was game on. It was game day. And I was 27 weeks, 5 days, really wanted to get to 28, but it wasn't meant to be. So, doctors came in, husband came up, family came, and it was time to give birth. So they decided that they were going to try to keep one of them in because only one of my waters had broken. I don't know if that's really what you call it, but that's what was going on. And then ended up getting a fever. So it was impossible to keep the one in. So remember being wheeled in, and felt like 50 people in there. I know it wasn't 50, but there was a team for me. Then there was a team for each of the girls. And then I delivered, and then we were whisked away. They were whisked away. And then there we go. Then that started the process of my new full-time job. So now my new full-time job was that I was going to come up and visit these little babies all day long. So that was my new job. And just a little funny quick story. I remember day 2, I don't know who it was, but the person comes in who fills out the birth certificates with you. So the woman comes in, and I literally just woke up and still had the IV of whatever the pain med was. So she's asking me the girls' names. So I tell her, and Sydney's middle name is Rachel. And so she's like, how do you spell that? So I spelled it. And then she left and I took a nap. And I didn't know if I was dreaming or not. But when I woke up, I realized that I had misspelled her name. So it's now kind of a funny thing. Her name is spelled like Rachel Ray. She has an extra letter in it. So it was just it was just funny. So now we just laugh about, don't fill out the birth certificates when you still have the IV for pain meds. And
Fair.
yeah, fair enough. So went down to the NICU. When they're that small, they're like little dolls. So they're both living in these little tiny incubators. They have cords on them. They've got IVs in them. And they're just laying there like these tiny little things. And we were just in awe that these little tiny babies were, they were there. And I remember thinking, gosh, like when do I get to pick them up? And they said, like, you can't pick them up. Their skin is like tissue paper that if you touch them, they'll bleed. So they just are living in these little incubators. And so I remember every day you get up, and because I love people and I love connection, I just befriended probably everybody in that unit. All the nurses, all the moms, all the family.
I can see that.
Yeah, it just became like, these were my new friends, and we were having this horrible shared experience, and we were all trying to get through it. And I remember one of the moms had lost her son, and she also had twins. And you know what? She didn't lose her son. She had lost her daughter. And so we became friends because she was the bedmate next door to my girls, and we just got connected.
Yeah.
So every day you go in, you hang out, you try to keep your sanity, and that's your job. And so I remember after 2 weeks, we went home. We lived really close to the hospital, which was great. And we went home and went to bed. And then in the middle of the night, the phone rang. And this is 20 years ago. So still cell phones were just kind of kicking in. I think it must have been our home phone. And it was that panic of like, oh no, something is wrong. Nobody's calling me with good news at 2 a.m. And it wasn't. So our daughter, Kelsey, had come down with some type of illness, and they didn't exactly know what it was yet. And they said, hey, when you come in first thing in the morning, you need to meet with a doctor. So I'm like, well, we're not going back to sleep. So probably got rolling, and we got to the hospital, and the doctor said that she had MRSA, which is a really bad infection.
Wow.
Well, it's really bad when you're an adult, but when you're 2 pounds, it's really bad. So the girls were 2 pounds when they were born. And so we found out she had MRSA. And what was also hard is that it was infectious and it was contagious. So we would go see Kelsey, and then we would have to go home, take showers, and then come back and see Sydney because we couldn't cross-contaminate. Yeah, so we were constantly going back and shifting. And so a lot of that is really fuzzy for me. I don't remember a ton of it. We were living, first of all, they were talking about things that I didn't know what they were saying. There's so many medical terms. And then we were just living in this state of fear, not knowing. So Kelsey's sick, but Sydney's also 2 pounds and tiny. And so it's just this constant state of fear and anxiety and stress while you're trying to show up and, be supportive and be there. So, let's see. So probably around day 5, the doctors finally said like, hey, she's not going to make it. She's not going to live. You are going to have to make a decision what you want to do. And this is also fuzzy. We got our family. We're sitting in a room. And for some reason, I decided I wanted to go see her by myself to say goodbye, say my goodbyes privately. And so I remember I walked in, and again in the incubator, and I put my hand on the incubator, and I remember saying to her like, hey, you have fought really hard. And I know that this has been a really tough road for you, and you can go. And as soon as I said that, she died. It was immediate, but it was such a beautiful connection moment. So then everybody came in. A couple days later, we had the funeral, and then it was right back to the hospital because Sydney was still there. So every day I realized that they had a really beautiful support group at the hospital, but like that wasn't what I was doing. I was there. I had to show up and I had to take care of Sydney. And she had her ups and downs medically, never anything really serious, but we got her out. So it was 57 days. And so I was there another, I don't know, 40 days or so after Kelsey had passed and finally brought Sydney home. And she came home before, I think it was a month before her due date. And so we brought home this little tiny, I think she was less than 5 pounds when we brought her home. And it was just such a relief to have her out of there and not every day have to go back to the hospital. So, yeah, it was it was really interesting over this month just to kind of walk through all that. And I was working and thinking, and then I'd go downstairs and I'd say to my husband, "Hey, do you remember whatever the thing?" And he would say, "Yeah, I don't really remember that exactly either." And so we tried to fill in the gaps just to capture it, but when you're in such undue stress and anxiety, it's hard to remember. Our brain doesn't, I think our brain just is trying to protect us.
Right.
So got her home, and then I was like, okay, so supposed to be a mom of two. Luckily, my in-laws had come in and um, kind of taken out the things that we have two of. I think we had two cribs and a couple other things. So they came and helped with that, which I was grateful for. And baby room was now set and we were home. And now it was time to decide what was next. So trying to be a stay-at-home mom and just sit in all this grief and really just try to figure out how to show up and what to do. And so my family was great. Um, Friends were amazing. I have a cousin, Joe, who lives in Massachusetts. Here's a shout out to you, Joe. He did one of the most amazing things for me. So I lived in Massachusetts, and there is a restaurant called Friendly's, and love their black raspberry ice cream.
Ooh.
And so one day, I don't know, it was pretty soon after we had gotten home, the doorbell rang and I opened the door and there was this huge box and I opened it up and there was a gallon of black raspberry ice cream
That's
with
so sweet.
chocolate
Oh
sprinkles
my goodness.
that he had gone and put on dry ice because he's just amazing. And so just like these little moments of pleasure and joy wrapped into just trying to figure out how to function every day.
They're like a little push to help you take
Yes.
that next step
Yeah.
forward. Just
And
Yeah.
so it's interesting because I think it's hard for people to figure out how do we show up? What do we
Right.
do? How do we care for somebody, right? When
Exactly.
we don't know what to say. And so I am grateful for all the amazing people who just showed up, people who came over and said, "Can we walk the dogs? Here's some food. You want to go get a cup of coffee? Let us take care of Sydney so you guys can go out and grab dinner." And so all the people who just showed up, we are just immensely sitting in gratitude for their friendship and kindness. And yeah, and then it was interesting. So the hospital had a group that we had started. I came in after it had started, and it was to support parents who had babies in the NICU. And so what do you do when you're not doing your own grief work? I'm like, yes, I'm going to go there and I'm going to support these parents who have babies in the NICU. So I hadn't done what I needed to do for me yet. I was working on it. So I would go and I would bring dinner. We all would bring dinner to the parents. It was a once a month thing. And you just kind of showed up and showed support because, like me, everybody's just trying to figure out, well, my baby's in the NICU and I don't really know what's happening. And I thought I was taking this baby home. And another thing I realized was my husband and I were just grieving very, very differently. So I am much more extrovert and need to talk about my feelings to process them, where he is much more introverted and needed space to internally reflect on the loss.
Mm-hmm.
I also had lost my grandmother about 3 months before our daughter passed. And I realized that I didn't really get a chance to process that either. I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral because I couldn't fly. And so there was just a lot of grief all wrapped into that. And we realized that we were grieving very differently. And just the culmination of all these other pains that we were experiencing, we couldn't necessarily support each other in the manner in which we both needed. We didn't realize that till later, so we were kind of fumbling through. And I think it's really important to think about expectations and what we need. And so people would call and say, "Hey, what do you need?" And literally, I had no idea what I needed in that moment. And he had no idea either. And I just think it's normal when you're grieving is that we just don't know. Right.
Okay,
And
so it's
Right.
the unknown complete.
so I had no idea exactly what I needed. I do know that just some amazing people stepped in at that point. So just a quick side note here. There was a group at the hospital that I became a part of. It was a preemies group, and we also would bring food up to the NICU to support parents who had babies in the NICU. And one day I was there and we did it monthly. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw somebody walking out and I realized that I knew who this person was. Sydney was probably a year and a half at this point. And this woman walked over and we looked at each other and just had the tightest hug. She was a dear friend that I worked with previously. We had lost touch and she had a preemie and her baby was airlifted that day from another state.
Wow.
And she, kind of like I was at the time, was just lost. And so that started and reignited just a beautiful friendship. And she is one of my dearest best friends. We actually have worked together. We worked together for over 12 years. And that moment really sparked the connection. So I was supporting her. And what we didn't know at the time is that she would end up being my greatest support system. So she is one of my dearest best friends, and we have been doing life together for 20 years. And she's the rock and showed up and just grateful to have somebody. And then through the years, just amazing people have showed up. And I truly believe like we're not supposed to try to do this alone. So what you all are creating with your community and people getting support and therapy, and I think it just takes a village. And I truly invited my village in once I realized I needed them.
I could not agree with that more. I am a firm believer in it taking a village.
Yeah.
And everyone has a different village, large, small, different forms, could be online, people out of state, whatever it is, but you have to find that village.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think on that, it's so important. And I have probably still struggle with it. I don't necessarily let people know what I need. I kind of shy away from that. And I'm like, I'm fine. I've got this. Even though I have my village and I have an incredible village all over the world. I'm so blessed for everyone that I know. But I think, Barbara, you have such a good point. You allowed people to walk with you, talk with you, be with you. You were vulnerable enough to allow those people into your life. And I think that's such an important lesson and something that I, after all these years, still have to work on.
Yeah.
So that's really important point.
Yeah, I tell you, it didn't start off that way. So for Sydney's year birthday party, I was like, we're going to have a very normal birthday for her. And so we probably had 25 people at the house and the whole thing, the brunch, the cake. And I got up and I said, okay, I got this. And was having the party. And I can't remember if it was before the cake or if it was after the cake, but at some point I had left the party found myself sitting in my walk-in closet in the floor with my tissue box, crying my eyes out. And so learning to invite the village in was not intuitive immediately for me at all. And then I got up, I said, all right, you got 25 people in your house. So washed my face, put my makeup back on, and I don't even know if anyone knew I had walked away and had that moment. So I would say allow yourself the space to have the moments that you need, and still while you're figuring out like how to have the support and love that you need. It's interesting. A couple other things that I've experienced. I realized one really hard question for me that I didn't have any way of knowing was when someone actually says to me, how many children do you have? So that is a very common question. People ask that all the time. And I have two. But when somebody asks you and so I do facilitation, I work with clients, and someone says to you like, hey, how many kids do you have? As soon as you say, well, I have two kids, one is deceased, it is
Right.
a
Like,
whole,
wah, wah.
it's like, wah,
Yeah.
wah, wah. All right, so the whole,
Like, what do I do now?
like,
with
oh
this
God, I shouldn't have asked
question? I
that
shouldn't have
question.
asked.
so the whole conversation shifts.
Right.
And so for me, that very, very common question used to be a big dilemma for me. Like, oh my gosh, what do I say? Do I say I have two, or do I say I have one? And every time I said I had one, I felt like I was dishonoring my daughter. And so what I have realized and what I do now is kind of depends. It depends on what's the context. It depends on how I'm feeling. It depends on what's the connection. And what I do though is if I say I have one, I touch my heart.
Right.
And that's just a little reminder to me that she's in there.
Yeah.
But I don't have to share my story with everybody.
Right.
It's my story, and I figure out when I share it. And I've just gotten really comfortable with that. But that was a really hard question. So I am now just very cognizant of how I ask people about their family systems. And
Yeah, I remember when I was pregnant with Jack, my son, people would ask me if it was my first, and I just felt so weird because it was actually my second pregnancy. And I did have a baby girl, but I didn't get to meet her, and it was I always felt conflicted, and it was triggering. So again, it's people have good intentions, and I think when we ask what we think are these innocent questions, their life is just so much more complex. Yeah. So I completely I understand that. Yeah.
And
It's
we
hard.
can't know. And nobody
Right.
is, nobody's asking to, other than they're just curious, or it's just a normal thing that we ask.
Exactly.
It's a common
Exactly.
question. And so
we just don't have the normal answers that we
right.
would like.
Yeah.
And so that just makes me think, and I've been very cognizant that everybody has a story.
100%.
Right. And so one of my favorite quotes is, be kind to all you meet, for everyone is fighting a hard battle.
Yes.
And I
love
think
that
it's
one.
Socrates, but I can't
Okay,
find
yeah,
it. I can't find exactly who said it, but I've seen that quoted. And to me, I think part of this journey for me has really been some clarity around, like, everybody I meet has something. They've been through something, they've experienced something. And if we could slow down a little bit and lead with kindness, I think that actually shifts the whole game for us, right? If we can recognize that people have heartaches and they're doing the best they can, and not expect things from people that they never said they would be able to do for us. I think part of this too, this grief journey, is around expectations, and we think people should do this, or why didn't they do that, or why didn't they say that? Well, most of the time they don't know, and they also don't know that you need that or expect that from them. And
so true. And that's something that has to be learned. I think we all feel that. We all have expectations. But as I say, I don't let people know what I need.
Mhm.
So I can't expect them to know it and give it to me.
Well, and even like we're almost 3.5 years into after losing Jared, and I find that I also 3.5 years out, I feel like I shouldn't have to keep asking for help because the situation is still the situation.
Yeah.
Like nothing's changed. Like I'm still an only parent over here, and I still need help with the kids, or would love relief with this, or some guy take Jack to this and have a guy experience. But it's I get tired of asking. It's that happens also. Like I've had this conversation with my mom. She innocently has said, well, I didn't know, you didn't tell me. And I've said, you're right. I'm tired of asking. And she just felt so bad. And, she's like, I get it, and it was it was a very sweet conversation. And I felt so supported. But at the same time, you go through these things and you're just like, oh, I'm exhausted. So, yeah.
And what I realized is for me, like this is my whole life. For someone else, it's just a blip, and they've got their whole life and all their stuff that they're dealing with. And so again, I think it just goes back to that we have to be very cognizant of the expectations that we put on other people because they're also trying to live life.
Exactly.
But it's hard.
It is.
It is.
It's hard.
It is.
So I think just one or two other things that come to mind is as you think about, creating connections and trying to let people in, I'm just a huge proponent of paying attention to that. And also, I think we all grieve so differently. And so some people do need people around them and they do need to have the support group. Other people may just need one person and they're not going to go to the support group and share their story with 30 people. It's not their process. And so I think paying attention and being cognizant and respecting somebody's process, I think is so incredibly important. Also, being the mom of a twins and having one pass away, I've also really had to wrestle with living in very conflicting feelings.
Yes.
So every event, I feel happy and then I feel sad. And so I'm sitting, every birthday, every milestone, everything to come. The thought is, well, we should be doing this with two. And so I've really paid attention through the years around, all right, so birthday's coming up. I'm going to create a little space that I know I'm going to be really happy for my daughter, and I know I'm going to feel sad. And so I've, through the years, really practiced almost normalizing that it is okay to hold two conflicting feelings at the same time. And I would say that happens all the time for me now. And it's our brain's not used to that. Our brain wants to do easy. It's not used to having to do the heavy lift with that. But that is where I live. And that's where my family lives when we have big milestones and anniversaries come up. And it is now that I just look at Sydney, I'm really awe at how amazing she is. It was really sad that she didn't have a sister. She's great. And because I have so many sisters, I realized I did spend some of my grieving around assuming that she felt a certain way because now she doesn't have a sibling, because I couldn't imagine not having my sisters. And so once I did a little untangling of that, I realized that that was me putting that on her, and she's just having her own experience. Like very early, she knew that she had a sister, and we did things for milestones. And I know that I've spent a lot of mental and emotional energy trying to show up well for her so she didn't have to bear the burden of my unprocessed grief. And now she's in college and thriving, and I'm well aware that she's on her own journey. And will take all that she's learned from us as her parents and continue to grow and develop herself. And that's kind of where we are now. My husband we're so connected, and we continue to just do this life together. And I'm grateful for him and the rest of my family and all the folks that have just showed up for us.
Well, thank you
Amazing.
so much for sharing your story. And, again, I know that there's so many people out there who have similar stories, and I do hope that this helps you listeners out there who can resonate. One thing that you said, going back to the milestones and events, I call that the bittersweetness, because you have that bitterness of what's missing and what should be. But then you still have, whether it's the birthday or a graduation, or, those things are so special and bring such joy and sweetness to life also. And that's grief. It is such a key component, being in that, in the widow, having the widow title. That is something that I know so well. And even after losing our first baby, I would look and see our friends' kids who should have been, the same age as, our baby should have been the same age. And, the milestones that they were making, it's like, oh my gosh. And then after I had Jack, I'm like, yeah, but it, Jack would have a big sister, and, just all of these things. And it's very bizarre. It's like a mind trick almost, but I think until you're in it, it's just really hard to explain the true bittersweetness of what life can bring.
Yeah, for me, it's often like what could have been,
Exactly.
Correct.
because
Yeah.
I
That's
didn't.
what grief
Yeah,
is.
because we didn't get to have a full life with her,
Mhm.
or really any life with her that wasn't
Right.
fraught with angst and anxiety and stress. And,
Right.
so we just see butterflies. So butterflies are our reminder. And we started that really young, when Sydney was really young. And it's just really beautiful. Butterflies pop up for us at the most unusual and amazing time. And
Mhm.
one of us will call out, "Oh, Kelsey's with us." And so it's just
That's
love that.
beautiful.
yeah, and my company logo is a butterfly. I wanted to have her close to me with work as well. And so butterflies are just our thing.
And for the listeners out there, Barbara's wearing a butterfly shirt as well. And I did notice that, because I do know that butterflies are a symbol and a sign. And I love that you brought her here today to share your story. So
Yes.
Thank
yeah.
you so much, Barbara. I know it's not always easy, but it's that's what it is. It's important to share, and it's important to know that we're not alone in this.
Yeah.
And it really is, it's a journey. Grief is a journey. It has ebbs and flows like any journey. And so thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you. I
Thank you
just really
both.
appreciate it.
Yeah, please keep doing what you're doing. You're making an impact, and your two beautiful souls matter. And so thank you both.
Well,
Thank you,
thank you. And
Barbara.
right back at you. And for all you listening, we will have more episodes on this topic. It's so important and not discussed enough. So stay tuned for those. And you can listen to Grief and Grit anywhere you can find podcasts. And you can also visit us online, griefandgritpodcast.com. And feel free to reach out, share your story. We're here to support you if you need anything, need any resources. Simonie and I are here. So thank you so much, and we will talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you love what you heard, please follow Grief and Grit and share our podcast with your friends and family.